Will 2025 turn out to be one of these turning points from the world? It's being suggested at the moment on a whole load of fronts. Obviously, the situation with Donald Trump abandoning Ukraine has forced a lot of focus across the whole of Europe. Keir Starmer has just announced that Britain's defence spending will rise. He's going to cut international aid funding to finance that. Will that mean more money for armaments firms in Britain? Will we turn into a mini kind of Russian economy? Who knows? That all lies ahead. The Germans have just had an election which has seen a far-right party come second for the first time since 1949. The new Conservative leader who's been elected has surprised everyone by distancing himself from the Americans that he previously cheerleaded for, and saying that Europe really has to stand on its own 2 feet from here on in because the Americans have gone. The Northern Europeans want to use the frozen assets of Russia, since they invaded Ukraine 3 years ago, to hand to Ukraine to arm itself.
Those are the headlines. Now for the podcast.
Hi, chums, and willkommen, bienvenue, welcome to the Best of British podcast. And I think you can tell by the introduction, I eschewed the Alan Cumming impersonation and singing the intro from Cabaret there. It's very much going to be foreign affairs led episode. And, you know, who would have believed, the old statement is a week is a long time in politics. My God, isn't it just? The world seems to have flipped around 360 degrees entirely on our speculation, was the transatlantic alliance over? And this culminated, it's culminated thus far, because Starmer is jetting off to Washington on Thursday, with Sir Keir Starmer's speech on defence spending and defence in general and UK security. He's just finished that, and literally as we speak, and we dropped out of Kemi Badenoch's reply. So, blimey. Wow, I'll let you kick off with that.
Well,
Whoosh.
I mean,
to cut
to the chase, basically, the UK will be spending 2.5% of our GDP by 2027, which is a brought forward deadline. If you throw in more spending on the intelligence and security services, it'll look more like 2.6%. The intention is to go to 3% of GDP in the next Parliament. And that will be paid for by cutting international aid.
Yeah.
So it'll go from 0.5% to 0.3% in 2027 is the year that it all basically, hits the ground. And it was interesting listening to all of this. There was very Churchillian kind of phrasing in this by Starmer. There was points where I just sort of thought it's almost like the little terse, well-created phrasing of Churchill actually on his speeches, and he's obviously trying to be what you were saying there about this being an absolute era-changing moment that we're in, which we'll get on to the rest of it. But the German elections certainly, that's a complete end of an era there as well. It does feel like a big turning point. So Starmer is trying to, kind of do that and sound like the statesperson who's kind of larger than petty politics. And in his way into describing all of this, he was actually praising the last Tory government for supporting Ukraine and said we were 100% behind you. I don't expect that's what produced Kemi Badenoch saying, well, actually, we support what you've just said. We always wanted more defence spending. So there was a huge roars of support at the beginning of his speech. NATO is our bedrock. Whoa, huge roar from everybody. We reject choosing between allies in the States and Europe. Less of a big cheer there, you'd have to say. Then obviously it's peace, not war, we're going for with Ukraine. Well, who would argue with that? And then this key point, it's time to change our national security posture because of generational change. And there's that phrase again, painful choices. Yeah. And he was saying to the public, we need to find courage. I mean, this is where it is. It's ramping it up like a sort of wartime effort, albeit not on our soil, that needs unity and so on. And, by this stage, it would have to be said a lot of the cheering had kind of died down. When it got to the international aid statement, not a sound. I don't know if you noticed, there was no roars, cheers or anything like that. And obviously Starmer's saying this is, again, it's played again, Sam. We're not proud to have to make this kind of choice, and we'll still go on supporting this, that, and the next thing. But, you're not listening by then, because you're just going, geez, that's what we're doing then, is it? And so that's the net of it. And off he goes now to see Trump, presumably having kind of bigged himself up. I mean, it's almost like a ludicrous big boy competition now, because President Macron has been over already, not probably getting anywhere. But, it's kind of like, who can be the go-between? Who can be the Trump whisperer? Starmer is trying to improve his chances by looking like he's talking Trump's language, which is absolutely, going, we get this, we now need to, raise our spending, our defence spending here. So that is quite a blooming moment. And it would be interesting, sets of people would be interesting to hear from, but we're speaking now. One is reform, because I don't know what their position on this kind of thing is.
Well, I mean, Farage has been iffing and butting, despite his previous support for Putin. He sniffs the potential of getting MPs elected in greater numbers. He seems to be withdrawing from that and saying, that Russia did invade Ukraine, etc. So we wait to see the response.
Well, it'd be interesting, just to have picked that out by the time this is all over, because, there's only so far he can go by sort of umming and erring. Although, to be fair, there's still probably quite a lot of room for manoeuvre there, in a way, given that nobody wants to throw a spotlight on him and say it's really important that we know what you think. So I guess there's that in it. And exactly the same thing when we jump to Germany with the far right party there. Similar kind of, they have really, I've been cozying up big time to Donald Trump, but it's almost like this question of, does cozying up to Donald Trump mean that you're cozying up to Putin? Because that for Germans is also quite a sort of seismic choice. And again, in that they have been the wild, far right guys that were never going to get into power. As soon as they get closer to elections where they could be acting soon as an opposition, the challenge for them will be whether they stay like this sort of wide-eyed insurgents with their far-right yuck, or whether they have to sound like they could catch a grip and run a country. And the same will be true for Farage, pretty soon. But anyway, I'm sure I jump ahead. It's all pretty gobsmacking. I don't know what to make of this, really.
Yeah, what I thought was interesting about Starmer's speech was, and I think, I don't know if you noticed, it was the fact his constant reference back to Clement Attlee,
yes,
the post-war period. So again, he was appealing to the Labour voters, saying, look, remember Attlee, remember Bevan. We were the founder members of NATO, and that was the bedrock of our protection with our strongest and most continuing ally, the United States of America, and our European allies against the Soviet Union, and now against the territorial demands and claims of an expansionist Russia. So it was again going back to socialist principles, he claimed there. Secondly, the other aspect of it was, by moving to this wartime footing, which I'm with you, I got that as well, this would be an opportunity for growth in the economy through defence spending to secure better working conditions and better pay for the British workforce, and to move on to this defence-orientated wartime economy through industry, through the universities, and again to secure growth in the economy. And the other thing about it as well was that we were going to pay for the cut in aid. This wasn't going to come out of overseas aid. No. This is because the new changed Labour Party and government was going to make all these savings on spendings on hotels and asylum seekers. So you're thinking, by gum, we must be spending an absolute fortune on that.
I find that very puzzling, because I sort of thought, isn't that a different budget? That's not the international aid budget. Did he actually say that the cut from 0.5 to 0.3? He actually did. He avoided saying international aid. I thought whatever it was he said sounded like it was trying not to say anything that would basically conjure up starving people,
Yeah, but apparently they have been. I mean, this is something that's been going on. I think I'm correct in this. They have been tea-leafing the money from international aid, claiming it's international aid, and spending it on hotels and people seeking asylum. So that's what they've been doing. So again, to increase the defence budget by that amount, I mean, by gum. We must have been spending an absolute fortune on that.
The other crazy thing, I totally did notice that when he was talking about, at the early point, he went on about, we reject choosing between allies, the Americans and the Europeans, and said strength depends on a new alliance with Europe. And then you assumed he would start to talk about defence. But as you say, he just immediately started talking about growth, blah, 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 as I put it here. But, that is the same thing then, isn't it? Because this is going to be a growth in defence spending and manufacture.
Yeah, exactly. And that's going to be getting Britain working again. I'm just actually trying to think that the other thing he said was that Putin thought to weaken NATO with his actions over the past few weeks. And he's failed in that. He's strengthened NATO.
Yeah, I know, because surely the big thing that's weakening NATO is Trump.
Correct.
As predicted, I have to say, by, I'm sorry if I've said this before, but one of the Nordic Horizon speakers, Eva Neumann, from 5, 6, 7 years ago or something, the last time Trump was in, and he said that we Europeans need to take over our own defence because NATO is basically a busted flush in that it either has America sitting at the top of it, or if Trump gets in and they decide to kind of go again, it is essentially a European fund that we somehow haven't kind of decided to run ourselves. And of course, he was poo-pooed and, oh, no, it's all going to be fine. And probably it wasn't people like myself, although I've got to put my hands up. I just didn't think Trump was going to make it. And there we are. I was wrong. But here we are now. So, I mean, the Europeans obviously have to. And there's the other thing, as you rightly pointed out in the last podcast, I think, was that not one of the great things that drove Brexit was the terrible threat of having a European defence force?
Yes.
Which the Brits were too, no, we couldn't possibly fall in with all these, be told what to do by Belgians. So there must be, there is, I know we're jumping all over the place, but the Nordics and Baltics have come up with a move to try to really increase spending within the EU and potentially to use the money that's been kept, basically, which is a huge amount of money. It's £200 billion, which could actually substitute for the amount of money the Americans are going to withhold. And it's basically the money that was Russian assets that were mobilized after Moscow launched its invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago. And the bulk of that money, 200 billion roughly, is held in a Brussels-based financial institution called Euroclear, and is earning interest. The Americans hold just 5 billion. So basically, Europe has got a bit of a, joker card there. It's probably, some people speculate it's up to 300 billion because of interest on that payment. And now there's a big argument about what to do with it. And the Nordics and the Baltics, Denmark, Sweden, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia all want that money to be used and basically handed to the Ukrainians to act as the bit of money that's missing. I think the Poles, the Chechens, and so on agree. There's then the other sort of the southern countries, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and Ursula von der Leyen, who's the European Commission president, think that confiscating those funds, the EU would spook international investors. But also that this is a kind of, you hate to have to even use the phrase Trump card anymore, but there you go. There's a card they think that means they will have to be brought into talks because they hold so much of the Russian assets that you can't actually have talks without them because that's the bargaining chip that they're going to use to whatever, to have some leverage to try to make sure that if there is an agreement, it's the end of a war with security guarantees for Ukraine. So all of this is kind of going on behind the scenes. And, that's a kind of other huge issue, which at the moment isn't getting much publicity. But I mean, my God, the amount of meetings, you talked earlier about UN versus something else. I can't keep up with it all. They're all, apparently the defense ministers are all coming to London on Sunday. Starmer's presumably getting on the plane now to go across to New York. There's an emergency meeting in a couple of days of EU leaders, I think in Brussels. There's just, there's a frenzy of activity as people try to figure out what to do next. And then there's the other bit, you can go here, my dear, which is the German elections, because that's been a bit of a kind of one as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got the fact that the AfD, which is the fascist party, let's be perfectly clear about that, which received significant outright support from both J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, and Elon Musk, most memorably, the chainsaw-wielding Elon Musk. They came second with just under 21% of the vote. The Christian Democrats, with their Bavarian allies, just under 29%. The SDP got slaughtered down to 16.5%. The Greens, 11.6%, and the Left Party up to 8.8%. So what you fundamentally got there, though, is because there's a firewall in Germany that none of the political parties said they were prepared to work with the AfD at all. And the fact that the breakaway left party, which used to be part of the breakaway left party, and the Free Democrats didn't get above the 5% threshold, it looks likely there's going to be an attempt made by Friedrich Merz with the new leader, undoubtedly Schulz is out, the new leader of the SPD, to come to a grand coalition between the two political parties. I don't think they need to include the Greens. And Merz, I mean, it was an interesting one. Don't you know, Leslie, I couldn't see it happening here, that on the evening the election results came out in Germany, the party leaders were in a television studio literally talking about the election result. And you can see the first indications of a potential coalition and the horse trading that was going on between them. But Merz, post the election, he was very, very clear that Musk in the US attempted to influence the election and compared them to the hostile interventions from Russia. He said that there had to be strengthen Europe and independence from the USA. And he questioned whether NATO would exist in its current form after the next meeting in June. And that's the next summit. So there appears to be there from Merz a whole thing going on there about a European defence force, a new European perspective on the alliances and standing up to Putin. And you asked about the AfD, but the AfD have been strenuous in the support pro-Putin throughout all this. And the other thing about it was, I don't know if you noticed that Donald Trump actually congratulated the CDU on winning the election, saying it was a right-wing victory. Now, I'm not sure if he actually knew to whom he was speaking, and maybe he thought the AfD had actually won. But the CDU, CSU in no way, shape or form support the foreign policy objectives of Donald Trump, which seem to be totally aligned with Russia now.
But apparently that's a complete about turn for this new, essentially conservative leader, Friedrich Merz, because he used to run the pro-American lobby group Atlantic Bridge. So, he was your Mr. America until literally he got elected. So I think the jaws are on the ground in Germany with exactly what he said. And when you look at it, he's not mincing his words. He said, I wouldn't have thought I'd have to say something like this, but after Donald Trump's statements, it's clear that the Americans, at least this American government, are largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. So it's kind of like everybody in their different ways is now moving around so quickly towards, a kind of new European platform on defence. It does make you think that, well, it'll be interesting to see how the UK works in tandem with all of that, because clearly we're not part of the centre of the thinking about all of this is the EU itself. But the thing that lots of articles have commented on about that German election, I mean, I'm looking at one here by a writer in Berlin who's saying Germany has been reborn 3 times since the Second World War. The first was in 1949 when the Federal Republic was formed. The second was reunification in 1990. And the 2025 election, which has just taken place, is the third. And the reason for that is because for the first time since the Second World War, a far-right party has come second. And since then, since 1949, no party other than the Christian Democrats, basically the Tories, and Social Democrats, basically Labour, it's just switched backwards and forwards between them, despite them having a proportional system. So the alternative for Germany, AfD's result, he's describing as it's an epochal, never quite sure how to say it, but an epochal moment because of how it shifts the political spectrum. So, it's like there's mirrors everywhere to what's happening in terms of how people move to try to cope with the far right, how they then move to cope with the disappearance of America, how they move to cope with having to watch Ukraine go under or support it big style with money. And all the time keep the show on the road with all the rest of the governmental stuff that probably matter more to people in terms of getting elected than anything we're talking about right now.
Yeah, because it's noted when you actually, I couldn't believe the electoral map of when you've got West Germany, barely any elected representatives from Alternative for Deutschland. The old East Germany, stap it through. It's virtually. It was virtually a shoo-in. Every single electoral area went for the AfD. And it comes back to that whole thing. You're absolutely right, Leslie, in the tackling these social issues, such as, but the focus on immigration, is it to do with lack of housing, lack of jobs, the impact of COVID, the impact of deregulation that took place in globalization and that falling through on working people, and the use that the far right can put to, it's all the immigrants. And we know where this comes from. And I'm always, you've got to be very hesitant if you're a German writer talking about the third stage, given the fact of the Third Reich, when you're talking about Germany and in these cases. But it is that point, that incredible split between what was the old Soviet East Germany and what was the Western liberal democracy of Western Germany prior to the reunification. And it's...
apparently with the AfD, that's the far right folk, their Congress was last month, and there was the chant was Alles für Deutschland, meaning Alice, the party leader, Alice Weidel. But this is a deliberate pun on the Nazi slogan, Alles für Deutschland, which means everyone for Germany. So, it is absolutely, it's not just courting this, it's walking right up to it. But the other thing that's happening, again, right now, by the looks of it, is a discussion before the new parliament takes over in Germany. There's a discussion about whether to basically change the constitution in Germany to allow to basically fund rearmament. There's constitutional bars against this. Germany has gone from being encouraged by everyone to basically not get involved in anything to do with military action. So there's a possibility of the two big parties, the Conservatives and the Labour, fundamentally CDU, SPD, to come together and discuss how to do that. They're calling that a handbrake turn, basically, to undo that constitutional situation. And of course, since they're the ones who would also be in talks about how to put a government together, they could kind of take a bit of time to do it, because the new parliament, with that huge whack of the far right in, will probably not go for it. So, it's mind-blowing, isn't it? Every time you think your brains are full enough of just all the complications of, a broken, blinking price cap in Britain, all the other domestic stuff that's on the go, suddenly it's like you just think, can anybody take any more kind of levels of complexity? And here we are. This is not ignorable. It is huge. And then they're not even talking about the situation in Gaza. this is foreign. And the thing that struck me about Starmer, just in his kind of last wee bitty there, when he was trying to it felt to me he was probably trying to talk over everyone's heads to what inevitably, I suppose, a lot of people will feel very strongly about Ukraine, because after all, the flags are still all over the place. There's such huge connection with Ukraine over these last 3 years, albeit there's probably not as many as there were. But will it get to a stage where people are thinking, if you can liberate, billions of pounds to give to Ukraine, and this might be Farage's position, let's have it spent here. So he was trying to say a threat to Ukraine is a threat. And then he was saying to Europe. And I kind of thought to myself, is that not exactly why, is that not a Remain argument? That if Europe is now operating as an entity, that I wonder how that works for Leave voters who just went, no, Europe's over there. That's them. We're here. I'm sure he'd make the point, well, you see, you can't just say that what happens because there are markets and there, whatever is growth lark, but you can't just say Europe's nowhere, it's right there. But then that's the whole argument that there ever was for being, a part of the political project, which is the EU. So dear knows how that'll all unravel, except that clearly Kemi Badenoch has basically said, we're with you.
Yeah.
So it's not going to come from her, but then that does leave the coast open for, dear old Nigel.
Yeah, well, the other thing about it, of course, is that what Kemi suggested as well is that he had listened to her in terms of cutting the overseas aid, cutting the aid budget, but would he take up her suggestions on cutting the welfare budget even further, and also cutting government spending in order to reduce the deficit and the interest? So we went on there. But just to add to the complexity, I mean, I have to talk about what happened at the United Nations. And please bear with me, folks. I will attempt not to lecture on this. The difference between the General Assembly and the Security Council. The General Assembly opposed the European drafted resolution condemning Russia's actions, supporting Ukrainian territorial integrity. Now, what happened there was that 17 nations opposed this. China abstained. The 17 nations, Russia, North Korea, Belarus, Israel, Hungary, Syria, Sudan, and the good old US of A. So there you go. It did pass, but any General Assembly resolution is non-binding. What then happened was that the Security Council, and there are 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the old World War II allies, UK, France, China, the USA, and the UK, what they do is they hold a veto. And because the Security Council's resolutions are binding on all members. And time after time over the past 3 years, Russia has vetoed any resolution condemning their actions in supporting Ukraine. When it came to the sticking point here was that when it was introduced, the European resolution supporting Ukraine and Ukraine's territorial integrity, condemning Russia's actions, when that was brought forward to the Security Council, bingo, vetoed. However, when the US one, which talked in general terms about bringing peace and a permanent solution, etc., the UK and France abstained. They did not veto that motion. So that resolution was passed by the UN Security Council. And that just shows you the fence sitting and the delicacy of manoeuvring that's been going on. You can hear it in Starmer and everything he and his government ministers say. For example, Bridget Phillipson on LBC refused to come out and mention Trump by name, saying, condemning it. It's as if, he's the devil incarnate. Say his name, he will appear and devour you. And that's what's happened there. They're straddling this whole thing. But it came to the sticking point. Russia was quite prepared to veto Security Council resolutions condemning them. But when it came to that point, the UK and France abstained.
Yes. Meanwhile, I was just having a look to see if Farage has spoken yet in the Commons. It doesn't look like he has. But of course, there's that other story that's running at the moment that the former leader of Reform in Wales is in court, accused of accepting bribes to make statements in the European. I mean, this is a priceless sentence, actually, to make statements in the European Parliament, that they were elected to and totally opposed its existence, but still, that would benefit Russia. So it was actually, money that came from a former Ukrainian politician, but it was one of them chaps that basically was, a massive supporter of Russia back in the day. So, there's quite, and of course there's that story running at the moment as well, that there might be a by-election caused by Mike Amesbury, who whacked somebody in Cheshire.
God.
So, we're going to have another little surge of kind of, I think the Guardian's got a story this morning as well, actually, about someone in the Lords having accepted, there's going to be a bit of a surge of these kind of stories. But the other thing that I was going to say, which is a sort of fascinating tale in a way, about something that Starmer's mentioned a couple of times, and I just noticed it because it basically relates to the Baltic Sea and to Finland particularly. But the thing that's really quite astonishing is what's called shadow shipping. It's easy for you to say, Squire, which is the way that the Russians have been actually managing to heave all their oil out, because, there's meant to have been sanctions and whatever, but actually, apparently, according to Estonia's foreign minister, about 50% of sanctioned oil is going through the Gulf of Finland. And it's going through old wrecks of boats, what are called the shadow fleet, aging vessels with obscure ownership. And it apparently, the rules are such that it's hard to stop them and to find out what's going on, which seems kind of extraordinary, because I don't know how you can get to the stage where you can make that estimate that huge amount of oil is coming out via kind of old shipping in the Baltic. How can you make that estimate and at the same time not have any nexus in how you can stop them and do something about it? But it seems that around in December, one dodgy kind of tanker was found off Finland and stopped. And so there's now a bit of a kind of effort on by all the Europeans to try to just use the rules they've got. It's a bit like the police pulling you over and telling your sidelight's gone. There's plenty that's gone on this fleet, but the size of the export, another way of putting it is that the shadow fleet is transporting 80% of all Russian crude oil.
Jeez.
And so when you think about the level of anger and political upset there is about Russia's continuing ability to be supplying oil, there it is, just getting pumped out through the Baltics. And the irony is it probably isn't going to anybody there. It may well be coming to countries who are politically beating their breasts a lot about isolating Russia, but are still dependent on their oil.
Well, that's an interesting one, because yesterday Lamy announced a whole raft, I think it's 107 new sanctions that is on this, including tackling the shadow fleet. So we'll wait and see what happens there. But this seems to be they're going to tackle the kleptocracy as well. It's named kleptocrats they're going to be doing, and trying to stop that flow of oil going into, I nearly said the Soviet Union there. That shows my age, going into Russia. But but you're right. It is that whole thing of, as you say, breast beating, yet what is actually going on in the background. Wow. But talking about oil,
it's a bit big to move on, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. But talking about oil, there was an announcement made at the Labour Party conference of 200 million extra. 200 million coming from the National Wealth Fund. We'll examine that in just a moment or two. And to which Anna Sarver said, "This is a significant announcement that secures the future of Grangemouth. This is the difference a Labour government makes." And me, I went and had a look at what's the National Wealth Fund. Now, it's the rebranding of the Tory UK Infrastructure Bank. It's still the same setup, and it's wholly owned and backed by the Treasury, but is operationally independent. So I thought to myself, who decided to put the 200 million quid extra into Grangemouth then? Couldn't have been the Labour government, because it's the National Wealth Fund. It's operationally independent. Aye, right. So that's the 200 million go around there. But the National Wealth Fund is specifically designed to increase private investment. So it's not money that's going to Grangemouth at all. It's money that's going to be there to attract further private investment into the sector over the 18 months while INEOS still provides the 400 workers who've been made redundant with their payment for redundancy payments, if you like, so 18 months worth of salary. And when listening to Anna Sarwar being interviewed by Martin Geisler, he also made the rather startling claim on Sunday that the Scottish government had been pushed by him and his efforts into providing the 25 million extra that the Scottish government provided a week ago. It was his efforts that got that involved, and it was the Labour government that got this 200 million in there. And as Sharon Graham of Unite said, the devil is in the detail, and this is all entire speculation that anyone will come in with the seedcon money that's sitting there, the 200 million, will come and invest privately in securing the future of Grangemouth and the workers that are in there. And so that's that one there. And I also had a quick look. 200 million sounds a lot. In August 2024, by this time it was the Labour government, 250 million was given to Quicklime to roll out full fibre broadband in rural Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. And so that's that one there. And 1 billion in October 24 was given to Barclays and Lloyds to accelerate retrofitting of social housing, apparently across the UK. So yeah, the 200 million seems a lot, but again, 250 million for broadband in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, and 1 billion for retrofitting social housing being provided to Barclays and Lloyds, again as seedcorn money.
Well, I started reading a really fascinating, put the link up, a totally fascinating piece by Politicos who've gone to Port Talbot in Wales, where they are facing complete meltdown there, and the prospect for the first time again in probably the post-war period of these seats actually voting reform, because that's what it's looking like at the moment. And basically, when you look again, the feeling is total betrayal by Labour in that they promised that Port Talbot would be secured if they won the election, but it looks like it isn't. There's a switch towards a greener furnace that would melt scrap metal from 2028. There's £80 million has gone in from the government to help staff and businesses. There's a 2.5 billion plan for steel in the works, supposedly. And the problem with all of this, obviously, there's 2,500 jobs being lost in the short term. Labour has held Port Talbot for 103 years. So, this to get to the stage where you're actually, Reform are polling top in that seat is kind of mind-blowing. But the thing will still be there, and this is maybe a common point across everything, is that, there was another piece actually that came out last week, and I haven't got it in front of me, spelling out how many jobs are being created by the green transition and how there are many. I wish I had it in front of me, but there are actual hard, tangible, it's not our imagination, they're there, jobs created. But for many people, the problem will be now they don't believe there's going to be even, a green steel future. They don't believe there's dry land on the other side. People in Scotland, the same. People are, they're seeing Grangemouth go. And I'm looking at a piece Commonweal. Craig DL has written about this. And, they're still uncertain that there would be a point in saving the old processing, which depends so heavily on continuing to use fossil fuels. I know there's a low carbon hydrogen kind of alternative. There's airline fuel, there's clean e-fuels. Nearly most of them look very unlikely to be enough to sort of secure a site, which, as Craig observes, is actually so close to the sea level rises that we can expect in the next while that it just doesn't look like it might even be a good place to locate anything in the long term, looking at it in the long term. But I guess the point is just that across everywhere, people are looking at what was the promise of the green transition, and they're seeing either forests of turbines going up, which still result in them paying more connection charges than anyone else in the UK. That'll be across actually most of Scotland. Or they're seeing big job creators like Grangemouth being shut down and nothing looking like it's coming in big confident terms on the other side. The same for the Port Talbot guys. They're just, green revolution, you can keep it because it ain't happening. The Welsh, if you remember, had that 20-mile-an-hour zone thing that was put through in Mark Drakeford's time, which they had to roll back from because it was so unpopular, although apparently it has actually measurably improved emissions and kind of breathing for people and stuff. And it feels a bit like where we're going now is also going to be a roll back from green, because that's the other leg that, that reform can stand on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because they can see how government has promised all sorts of things to people and is then totally welched on the deal. So this is a really tough one. I was listening to the wireless this morning, and Angus MacDonald, who is the new Lib Dem MP he lives in Fort William, was on. He's got some cut glass accent, I've got to say, for a lad from Fort William. But anyway, that can happen to people. And he was basically saying how appalled he was, like other people, seeing all the turbines around him, and actually the kind of cost of the price, so-called price cap, what a blooming flexible cap that is, which is going up by 111 quid over a year now. That price cap, he sort of suggested, was being incurred by folk in cities who are on mains gas, because that's the one that, global markets, yada, yada. Yeah. Unfortunately, people in the blinking Highlands are on gas. They're on, may not be mains gas, but isolated communities, which should absolutely all be using renewables because they're being produced right outside the door, are very rarely directly using renewables, which is the absolute horror of this. And if I was standing where Angus MacDonald is, I wouldn't be making a distinction between rural areas and urban ones. I'd be making a blinking case for Scotland having control of its own energy, because that's the one that would let us really start motoring and correcting the situation where we're all sitting producing green energy and seeming to get certainly not getting any of the pricing benefits, and still sitting connected so much to gas for heating.
Yeah, it does come down, for me, it always fundamentally comes down to who owns and controls the means of production. That's a simplistic way to put it. But who owns and controls the power companies? Who decides what's going to be happening here? And that's the fact of the matter. We're completely tied to this market, which, as you say, it's the wholesale gas prices, which is lunacy. And the whole matter is that when we actually look at the opinion polls, and you were talking about reform, this is the cleft stick in which Anna Sarber and Scottish Labour find themselves in that, on the one hand, has been identified, they're losing votes to the SNP, which would be, let's put it within the framework of the way things operate, which will be seen as a left of centre party, yet they are losing probably more votes to Reform, who are a right-wing party. So you see Sarwar attempting, through his statements, to simultaneously tack left through the attacks on the NHS, neatly dodging the fact about the state of the NHS in Wales, who in the Welsh Labour Party being in power and in charge of the NHS down there for 26 years, saying, I'm not running to be First Minister of Wales. Yet, on the other hand, talking about government waste and the ludicrous idea of bringing a Department of Government Efficiency as done by Elon Musk. So you've got that whole thing that's going on there, and the Labour have got themselves in an awful bind up here. Plus the fact he's claiming that the SNP will attempt to use the 2026 election to focus on tension on decisions taken elsewhere, somewhere else in the country, and not to focus on issues in Scotland. Again, severing that link between the economic policies and fiscal policies of the UK government and the complete impact it has on the ability of any Scottish government of any stripe to do anything because of the Barnett formula and not being in charge of its own resources. So you're absolutely right. It comes down to the fact that in Scotland, we could, as an independent nation, we could make different decisions about who owns and controls energy and the fiscal decisions we make, and also the foreign policy decisions we make. But currently we're tied totally to what's going on in England and the necessity of the Labour Party in England to straddle that whole left-right divide and to fight off reform.
And actually, I must say, I was I was kind of mildly irritated by a tweet that I think you noticed as well, which came from Michael Shanks, who is energy minister now. He's a Labour MP, and he tweeted from the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero about the Great British Energy Bill being in Parliament today. I think this was yesterday, the day before. Great British Energy will support local energy projects like EGG in Scotland. And there's a wee film of him sort of gadding about and pointing out how generating their own clean power has basically benefited the island community. I sort of sat and looked at this for a while and thought, because as you know, the guys that are speaking there, islanders, you know, I mean, of course they are. If anybody comes over and speaks to them, they'll speak back to them. And it's a free blooming world. It's not like, you know, egg belongs to independent supporting people, although it would have to be said it's a pretty yes island actually, but still that doesn't mean you know don't speak to whoever comes over. And yet, just without going into any detail at all, the suggestion is that somehow, you know, any government helped Egg, and they blooming didn't. I mean, Egg was became independent, if you like. The community buyout happened in 1997, before the Scottish Parliament began. So on its watch, no political party helped. They got there themselves with support from the public. There was not a penny of state money went into Egg. So fine, they did get a Nesta grant, which was a sort of for their Egg electric system, which is the reason that everything has changed so substantially for them. And I suppose fair enough, the money from Nesta probably comes from the UK government. Okay, but really, it's more just, you know, the big thing that's missing at the moment is money for community energy and community renewables. I was up in Ullapool at the weekend. Doing an event in Ullapool on Friday night and showing one of the wee Iceland films that I've made that's on the YouTube channel. And we were totally talking about the maddening nature of being stuck with, you know, wind farms going up anywhere, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink, basically. Actually added to that, and I will be looking a bit further into this, is the story that there is a hydro dam that was created nearby with a pledge to transfer a certain whack of the proceeds into community funds, which seems to have been abdicated by an owner who sold it to someone else. So there's, you know, this is now moving to different kinds of energy than just the wind farm business. And it seems like nobody has, it's as if the Scottish government also is just shrugging, holding its hands up and saying, we can't stop these guys. So here's the thing for the Labour government and Great British Energy and Michael Shanks, and dear knows if he's listening. After all, you know, Liz Smith, sorry in a sense to see you go, but the Tory MSP who's standing down in 2026, you know, sort of long innings. But anyway, if Michael Shanks is listening, then reintroduce support for community energy projects, because they got kiboshed by the Tories. And if you're going around the Highlands, you can see the places that just managed to sneak in and get a hydro project done before the axe fell, because they're the ones that have got tuppence halfpenny to spend on anything. Everybody else stuck, angry, and ready to kind of hit the incumbents, whoever they believe the incumbent to be, in retaliation for not letting these energy-rich communities reach anything like dry land. You know, and with some sort of cash for them to do what they want themselves.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, it is that whole thing, that the incumbents, that I think that is going to be key to the 2026 Holyrood election. Who will be perceived as the incumbent? And currently, it's the UK Labour Party is perceived as the incumbent. And Sarwar's hoping to change that by his eternal focus on the NHS. And his, that's what he's going to go on about. The NHS, the NHS, the NHS. And it's going to be up to the SNP to be able to counter these continual attacks with the actual facts about the difficulties the NHS right across the United Kingdom are facing, given the way it's been severely underfunded by the Conservatives, and the potential for private sector involvement that Sarwar completely embraced when he talked about it with Martin Geisler, for example. I don't know if you saw where he actually said that, he's got no ideological block on using the private sector to come in and provide free at the point of delivery services for NHS payments. And the problem with Scotland, believe it or not, is we've got too small a private sector when you actually compare it to places like London. And I'm going, what kind of world are we actually living in where this is going to be acceptable for a Labour politician to be saying? But that's what's going to be fought on. Who's the incumbent? And I think that's That's the one that in the next 18 months or so that the SNP is going to have to get to grips with, because that will be the continual attack that's going to come from Sarwar and the Labour Party. It's the NHS. And on the other hand, appealing to reform, it's wastage. It's government spending on nonsense and wokery.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's going to be. I'm not exactly thinking. I feel like I'm looking forward to the next 2 years of this, up to 18 months up to the election. But I suppose there's still a decision to make for Farage as to whether or not he is the face. I mean, the Welsh, interestingly, have got the same thing. It looks like Farage will be the face of reform in the Welsh version of, in the Welsh elections, which is such an annoying way that the perspective of that article in many respects, because, Labour, all the off the record comments they've had seem to suggest that Labour is only looking at that as a dry run for the next general election, as if Wales in itself doesn't really matter. And doubtless it's exactly the same for Scotland. But would Farage be the face of reform in Scotland? It's
going to be Thomas Kerr that goes around picking up paraphernalia from outside the safe consumption zone.
There's not much of a kind of contest, and then it just begs. This now seems to be the world that we're in. That you could have somebody that's as paper thin as Farage with no solutions about anything, who will just jump, because since the elections will be held at the same time, will probably get a blinking helicopter and just be jumping from Wales to Scotland to try to be the face of both campaigns, because his own candidates are, that's just...
Yes. And what you've actually got as well is that Starmer obviously has a UK strategy that operates about getting re-elected in 2029, whereas his matey boy up here, Starmer, got to be elected in 2026. So, it's the famous Maynard Keynes when he talks about economics. In the long run, but he's dead. He said, translating into Scots. And that's the whole thing. In the long run, the Labour may think that's a strategy that's going to win in 2029 across the UK, Madoot. But 2026, it means for Sarwar. But it's and I guess in this digital age, of course, again, it's the possibilities for potential misinformation. I don't know if you noted the fact that it was spread across social media that Anna Sarwar had dissed Billy Connolly, and that spread like wildfire, which shows the hazards of the modern digital age, which I myself experienced in my lost phone. So you're glad to hear, folks, I managed to become a digital person again. My identity was restored, so I'm now back on Skype. But on a more serious note, and this is something I was going to talk about a few weeks ago, and it's come to the fore again with the Make It Fair campaign about the use of artificial intelligence. And that's back to Nigel Farage. Artificial intelligence. Is he intelligent? Is all artificial? Anyway, so artificial intelligence, meow Joyce, artificial intelligence, and the proposal that's come in the government bill, which I thought had going to be revised, was that in order for any creator of content, and that's a journalist, an author, or musicians, in order for you not to have your material mined by an artificial intelligence organization and then utilized to create content based upon what they've mined, you're going to have to actually opt out from this. So it's running totally in volte-face to the current copyright laws, which means you can't steal something which is the intellectual property of someone else. Now, what the creators have turned around and said is this is a ludicrous situation, because if you actually look at the analogy, what it's akin to is I'm at work, I put my mobile phone down on my desk, I leave it there, and if one of my colleagues just decides they're going to walk up and pocket it, the only way that I can get back at them is if I have got every single person in that organization, including the one who happens to pick up my phone, to sign to say, I do not allow you as an individual to pick this up. I'm going to have, as a creator, to go around and identify every single artificial organization that wants to data mine my creativity and say, you're not allowed to do this. And it's a ludicrous situation. And Make It Fair, I think there's 1,000 artists have recorded a la John Cage, silence in recording studios and put it out on an album saying, this is what will happen. to our creative industries. And the creative industries bring in 120 billion, at least estimate, to the UK economy every year. And that spreads right across its newspapers, its authors of all kinds, and its musicians. And luckily, there seem to be MPs seem to be standing out against this. They're going to be bringing amendments to turn around and say, no, copyright must apply to artificial intelligence data mining. But given the drive that Starmer seems to be focusing on with artificial intelligence, I actually think they'll force this through, which is absolutely, in every sense, criminal.
Gosh, right. My brains are sort of reeling at that. I'm just hoping the coach is listening because, has that got any implications for us?
Well, it'll have implications for anyone, Leslie, because I can actually go into, if they allow this to happen, a company can go in, and the data mining company can go in and say, oh, I'm going to evaluate Leslie Riddick. So I can then go in and say, write me a Leslie Riddick article, a Leslie Riddick style article on land ownership, land reform. So what you could have right throughout the media industry, not just music, which is glaringly obvious, but again, in terms of newspapers, you could have completely AI-produced newspaper, which can actually mimic and apparently give out articles, which will be, Kevin McKenna, Leslie Riddick, Ian McWhirter, Jim Spence, anybody you want to say.
All right, I'm slowly getting up to this then, but I mean that's only. I mean, to be honest, I almost don't care if anybody wants to sort of. I'm sure that it's happened quite a few times. Really, rip off or just cut and paste, articles and then incorporate it into their own stuff. As long as the ideas are getting out there. I mean, I don't mind particularly. It's only, I guess, if you could then go and you're calling it a Leslie Riddick column, I think I would kind of notice that.
Yeah, well, let's say it does apply. It's the musicians one that really is the important one, because I mean, it takes me back to, I think it was about the late 80s when John Fogerty, who was the founding member of and creative force behind Creedence Clearwater Revival, was actually sued when he moved from Fantasy Records to Warner Brothers for actually plagiarizing his own work. Because the record he produced for Warner Brothers sounded too much like Creedence Clearwater Revival. So, I mean, and I know he won his case, but I mean, again, saying to me, could you actually get in the ludicrous position where an AI company sued Paul McCartney for writing a song that sounded too much like AI-produced material based on the work of Paul McCartney?
But then on the other hand, I mean, now producing stuff for YouTube, I'm very conscious that you have to, you've got to totally sign up that what you're getting is either copyright free in the YouTube library, which is how most people on YouTube are using that. Musicians are selling their stuff to YouTube, who then make it free for other people to use within YouTube films. And that means you can't actually show it other than on YouTube. So when I was mentioning showing that wee film about Iceland, we actually had to play it out from YouTube, as opposed to, with the Denmark one, which somehow was different. That one could be shown. Oh, it's because it hadn't gone onto YouTube yet. It was shown before it went online. So I could send, whacking great quality to people to download. And it was, it was very high quality, and there were no ads in the middle. I've got to say, how we laughed as we were watching this film about kind of Iceland and energy there. And suddenly in the middle of it, there was, adverts for kind of washing up liquid and all sorts of other things just suddenly jumped in, which I must say I hadn't screened through enough to see would happen. But that's how absolutely rigid, some of the online world is about you absolutely having to have copyright and not being able to mess about with it. And I hope the coach is listening, because he'll go, God, she must have been listening to me some of the time, actually, Yeah. And then on the other hand, there could be this future great ripoff of people who just go right round the sides of all these kind of, players like YouTube that are setting down frameworks of stuff, for everybody in the middle. Anyway, right, I don't understand this. We'll be told what to do.
Yeah, well, just speaking of the coach, I mean, and I was going to be talking about this I was going to be talking about biscuits. And for those who watch Scottish football, no, not Alan Preston, the former Scottish footballer, who seems to be about the only person left on SportsSounder's sports scene that hasn't gone to become a manager at Rangers. But anyway, so not Alan Preston, but biscuits. And I was going to be talking about the fact that I bought a packet of McVitie's chocolate digestives, and what the hell's happened to them? They're half the digestive and half the chocolate. But that was trumped. Oh God, I've used the word. That was trumped by the coach, who came up with this obscure. And I'm looking for the listeners to get in touch about this. This obscure statement about ginger snaps, which were never a popular thing in our house anyway. It was rich tea biscuits if we were lucky. Which if you took a ginger snap in your left hand in the palm and hit it off your right elbow. And depending, if you got 3 in pieces, that was good luck. Or it broke into a number of pieces and you got the number of wishes they got on it. And I said to him, never heard of it. And I said, of course, Dundee being the cultural benchmark at which all things Scottish should be marked against, I don't know it, never heard of it. And
so it doesn't exist?
It doesn't exist. Of course not.
You're great stuff, aren't you? And also, wasn't there a slight suggestion that the Irish particularly did something about this? So this is like, if Pat doesn't know about it, that means it doesn't exist in Dundee. It doesn't exist in the Irish hinterland. Therefore, it doesn't exist. But it does. It does, apparently.
Apparently it does.
I mean, who knew? It's not a thing. I've got to say, the coaches has also got strange predilections towards walking up to people and telling them if they haven't actually if they haven't basically undone the vents on their suit jackets.
Oh, yes.
Or coats. Right,
yes.
This is the thing where people, this is just another bit of the sign of the times where people buy things that have got cleats, or what's the word I'm looking for? And
you're right.
Events, and they're just lightly kind of stitched over just to keep them looking good on the hanger. But he sees people walking around all over the place with the stitching still in.
It doesn't go up to them.
Drives him mad. So he does actually go up to people and.
Oh well, don't get me started on guys that walk about with the top button undone of a suit jacket and other buttons done. That's my thing. But I would never dream of going up to somebody and saying, "Fasten that bloody top button, will you please?" Because it looks ridiculous. Yes. So we managed to actually to come round to talking about vents, and having vented, oh, there you go, there's that awful set of connections, vented about all that's going on in the world this week. Fingers crossed, we'll all still be here next week to chat once more on the Leslie Gregory podcast, and we'll see you then, chums.